Hi, thank you for joining us to, again, My Business, Your World. I'm Dr. Corrine Graham. This program is to bring to you or to share with you some insights other small business owners are actually have in their day-to-day business operations. Today we have with our special guest is Mr. Manuel Perez, who has a significant background in not-for-profit, the international arena, and as well in some political affiliation. Mr. Perez, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Miss Graham, or Dr. Graham, actually. And feel free to call me Manny.
Thank you. Yeah, Miss, I think went through the door a while ago. All right. So our program is pretty simple and straightforward. We facilitate just conversation about you, your business. What are some of the pains that you have as you go through those? What are some of the things that you're working on and that you're looking to get involved in? So let's start with, tell us a little bit about who Manny Perez is.
Well, I was born overseas, came here when I was 3, and basically went back and forth between South America and here during my childhood until having finished my master's degree in NYU, my dad passed away right in the middle of my first year of postgraduate studies of my PhD. And I had to go back to South America, where I did real estate. He managed real estate investments. I had to deal with a lot of family issues, which taught me a lot about another culture, because I'd basically grown up here in the U.S., even though I traveled a lot. But when you are in the U.S., you are used to everything working. I mean, you don't really understand what it is to be outside of the U.S. till you're actually having to ask favors to get your phone fixed. It is crazy. But anyway, I stayed there. I went into the oil industry. I worked in the oil industry over 2 decades, doing a lot of stakeholder relations and management, community development, and a lot of work with nonprofits, as well as myself working in nonprofits. I'd been active in my community here in New York. Very easy. Everything fits in the system. Down in South America, in Caracas actually, in Venezuela, I became a specialist in helping the community find its resources and solve its problems. It was a lot of what a startup entrepreneur does, but my startups were actually projects with the community. And they'd say, oh, we need to buy this. And I'd say, why? So-and-so's throwing it out, because I had a big network. And we actually managed to do a lot of good things down there. Then, I had family, things happened, came back to the U.S. in '99, and started over. New York City was totally different. I'd left a New York City where there was a Truth in Lending Act, a Truth in Advertising Act. I mean, you'd listen to an advertisement and you could assume that there was no hype in there, that any hype was limited. I came back to a New York City where anything goes, where they could lie to you in the publicity and the advertising, and they called it freedom of speech. It was a different reality for me. And the other thing I discovered is that the English that I spoke, and I'd continued speaking in the corporate world, was no longer the same English of my neighborhood. There were different slang. Some words were okay, some words were not. I had to learn all that stuff over. And that's crazy, because I said, I'm an American. I grew up in New York. How much can things change? Well, they changed a lot.
Well, change is always for the good, and it doesn't really happen overnight as most would think. If you're not in that community as you shared, being raised most of your life here in the U.S. in New York City area makes a difference when you're traveling. A lot of times we're not exposed to other culture, so we do not understand certain things that we take for granted. And oftentimes, people sometimes think they're owed a sense of because of those same nuances. Now, you mentioned a little bit a key word, and very key in terms of today's business society, and not just business, your personal development as an individual, for students, for everyone, networking. And networking is what's going to make the difference in terms of helping to drive business, helping you to be very successful in certain paths or positions that you're going to go into. You have to build that group of people who are going to be people that trust you, know your work, and can make referrals. Talk a little bit about networking, I guess.
Well, networking, for me, networking is actually building a community. Building a community of trust. A lot of people think that networking is simply getting a lot of business cards, making contacts with people, and then calling them when you need something. And yes, that can be useful, and yes, if I need a lawyer, I'll look through my cards and I'll say, oh, I have so-and-so. Even though at this moment I have a few lawyers that are friends of mine that I can just call and talk with them. The idea of creating a community of trust is that you have people who know you, people who understand you, and people who both you trust them and they trust you. So I'm part of right now 2 networking groups in the northwestern Queens area. The Jackson Heights Executive Breakfast, which has been going, I think it's now going into its 5th year, and it's just breakfast. Right now it's at 7:30 in the morning. Not too many people like that, but the few that show up, we talk, we have really deep conversations because we've made a commitment. Now the other group I've got is El Punto Network, which is for Latin Americans and Americans exchanging ideas, and that's a much larger group. It's also a group that if you decide to have an event at a bar in the evening, a lot of people will show up. And they'll do regular networking. The one where you do 5 minutes exchanges with people, and it can be fun. It can be exciting. But I don't know how much I can grow in a 5-minute conversation, or how much I can establish the value I have for the other person and the value the other person has for me.
Well, isn't that, essentially, when you go networking, it should be really learning about that person. The takeaway should be, what is so special? That person should be able to sell you one thing that makes them memorable to you. The relationship builds from there. You'll remember that. Typically, some people, they ask for the card, it's blank at the back because you can write a little note or jot something down. Some people like to see things on the back, like, what do you do? And when something comes up that they can chat. But this is just an intro. You
Right.
have to remember, it takes 7 seconds to make that first impression. However you want to look at it. You have 15 minutes to make an elevator pitch, give or take. It has to be succinct, and you have to make the best out of it. So in those environments, you want to be very sociable. You want to be very personable and get to know people. And you don't need to pass 500 cards. I think the misconception is a lot of people go around and just pass the cards. Make the connection so that you can add the value or learn more about those individuals.
Well, one of the meetups that I went to lately that wasn't my own, I'm a member of Goodnick, and this is for nonprofits. But the idea was that we actually signed up and said what we were good at and what we wanted to find out. And we did an exercise where everybody met, where I met with people who knew more about social media than I did. And I actually met with a lady who had a fundraising question, so I was able to help her with that. And we did exchanges of ideas. And that one was very good because we organized a little bit more to know why I would want to talk with this person. And then, of course, serendipity happens. You pass by a conversation, you hear something interesting, and then you turn and you become a part of it. I think networking is key. I do believe a lot, like you said, don't hand out 500 cards, because then all you did was hand out business cards. It's more important to get one or two people that you clicked with at every networking event. And that's why I keep on doing it, because at every networking event, I meet someone that I find a value in them. And then I can work with them. And if I don't, well, fine, but I learned something from them.
Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about, in terms of some of the things that you've done. I think it says you're a CAMS. That's
a certified anti-money laundering specialist. I got my certification in 2010 through the Association of Anti-Money Laundering Specialists. And that's basically a certification that allows me to work with financial institutions with, my specialization is money service businesses and remittance organizations, which means sending money across borders, and making sure that they meet all of the regulations, all the requirements that the U.S. law has to prevent money laundering, that international agreements have for preventing money laundering and preventing the financing of terrorism. And I add the special sauce in that sense, that with my management and business experience, I can help the small businesses that are doing this find solutions that aren't that expensive. So that's what I did with the anti-money laundering part. What happened, though, last year, well, 2 years ago, I learned about Bitcoin. So I looked at it, and I read the white paper, and I said, wait a minute. This is a system that's much more secure and much more transparent than our present financial system. This can be used. It can be useful. And it can help us solve some of the problems we're having right now. Part of the problem with money laundering is that a lot of people do things without thinking. And money laundering is a legal concept that comes because we found out in the history of mankind that a criminal will steal money and then he'll give away money and be great friends with his friends. So his friends are always defending him. And when the police or the government or anybody wanted to go after the criminal, the friends would say, no, no, no. He just lent me $20,000. He's a nice guy. He can't be a criminal. That's one of the big problems of money laundering as it existed in the past. There were no controls, and some of the biggest criminals were also giving great handouts. One case is interesting in Medellin in Colombia. Before the government clamped down on the drug cartel that was there, the drug cartel ran the city and had better services than the rest of Colombia. So the city defended their drug cartel. That's crazy. Because one of the things about criminals is they're not loyal. If the winds change, they blow in a different direction, they go with the wind. And the city then is left with all the problems.
So that being said, what happened there? How did they transition out?
Well, the government sent in the army. They arrested the drug cartel leaders. Mm-hmm. The city went through a transition period, as I remember. And now, because, of course, the citizenry told their politicians, we're used to having good services, they've got good services right now. Mm-hmm. And actually, the city had better infrastructure to build on than many other places in Colombia. So Medellin, Colombia is a very nice city right now.
Mhm.
But from that example, now going to the rest of the world. There is so much money going into criminal activities and coming out of it that small countries, including Colombia, can have their economy distorted by the drug money. And let's remember, people listen to whoever is paying them. So when the drug cartels could bring in more money than their government could, people tended to listen to the drug cartels. And I'm sorry I'm picking on Colombia, by the way, guys. It's just a little bit of history. This happens in every country, everywhere. In Chicago, it happened. It's something that when there are criminal rings that are more powerful than the local government and they have more money than the local government, then the little people tend to get stepped on.
Yeah, I mean, it's not too far-fetched. This has nothing to, I guess, in terms of money laundering, but I think recently on the news there was this big bust with the heroin package that they found and so on. So there's problems everywhere. Now let's talk a little bit more about, you mentioned about digital currency,
Yep.
Bitcoin, and so on. That's an initiative or a startup that you've started.
Yes.
Now, let's talk a little bit about that. Give some insight. What are some of the nuances, some of the challenges? Because with technology, it evolves. The last 10 years of what has happened in comparison to where technology is going today, science, technology, or STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, there's a lot of opportunities for businesses. And oftentimes they're not looking at what is out there and what are some of the opportunities that they need to jump on that can help them save money or start to make some money. And it's often challenging because, again, they don't necessarily have resources available. There's a lot of companies and even the government saying we have resources that are available. But as a small business, you go and you hear X, Y, Z, A, B, C, all the way down and round again, and you're still stuck in that same
Oh yeah,
state.
the government will help you if you have everything you need, except for that one little form. Then they'll help you. And I'm exaggerating just a little bit, but one of the ironies of life is that in New York City, most small businesses are owned by immigrants. And let's be honest, some of those immigrants are not 100% documented. They don't have all their papers in order. But to go to visit the Federal Small Business Administration office, which is in a federal building, they have to go through the whole process of showing their ID, of taking off their shoes, of getting everything x-rayed. It's not a comfortable process. I've gone there twice. I've had to go through the whole process. And then the Small Business Administration people say, oh, but you could have called me and I would have gone down and brought you in through the employee entrance. And I'd look at them and I'd say, but I didn't know you and I didn't have your phone number. I came to the office. And it's just a complex situation with getting resources when you're a small business. There are a lot of resources, but then there's the other part. They say it's free, but you pay with your time. And your time has to be between 9 and 5 p.m., which is when normal office hours are going on, and which is when you are supposed to be working at your own business that you're trying to bring up.
Yeah, but I'm going to go in and throw a little dagger or dart right there. It's you have to make time to go out and learn. And as small businesses, yeah, there are days you have slower days. There's someone else that can run the operation. You can't be sitting there, and if there are resources or things that are available, you are not going to grow. And if you're already in a certain situation where you're not making any progress or you're about to lose your business, whatever that nuance is, you have to find the time to develop yourself and your business. So it doesn't matter. I think you have to plan and organize accordingly. So I do understand you can't
Oh.
take away from those key operating hours, but you also have to plan those key operating hours.
And now let's take the other side of the coin. Small Business Administration offers all sorts of support and talks, weekends and evenings.
Yeah, but I'm not going to go back
No,
and forth
all I'm
with
saying
what
is-
I know, but
but
in
just
evenings
so that
for
they're there.
most businesses or individuals, especially sole proprietors, you have family, you have other engagements. That's the time they're going to capitalize on the networking
Mm-hmm.
event to go and promote their business and pass those business cards. And on weekends, same thing, whatever you can't get to do and so on. You don't have 24 hours. You do a 24-hour day, but it's almost like a 48-hour day that you have to have. So let's just try and go, because the
Yeah.
thing is, no, we have a lot to talk about, because I wanted to share a little bit more about the cryptocurrency and what you're doing
Yes.
there. And we're only on for about an hour, so I want to make sure that we get in whatever it is you want to share and chat about, and not go, because you can take this conversation any number of way, and there are lots of different input and insight that's
Yes.
there. So let's get back to, I guess, when we're talking about even money laundering and so on, and talking about a new currency, a digital currency, or
What
what's
got me
going on.
excited?
Go. Yeah.
I got excited when I read about the new cryptocurrency. It's basically a digital money that can't be copied. You can't do cut and paste and make money, which was the problem with a lot of the things you did with your credit card and such. People could cut and paste your credit card if they managed to get a copy of your number. And this one didn't allow it to happen. So it was a lot safer in that sense. It also was new, just a few years old. Right now, we're talking it's 6 years old. So a brand new technology. It's coming in. It's got some people that are so excited about it that one of them, when I became an advisor to one of the companies that was coming from Ukraine to the U.S., and the guy had as his description, Bitcoin evangelist. So I told him, excuse me, what do you mean evangelist? He says, that's what we call ourselves when we're promoting it. I said, oh, okay, I'll go with that. But I did notice the religious undertone to this. Because the people involved in cryptocurrency, and this is a business opportunity, they look at it almost as if Bitcoin and the technology associated with it will solve all our problems. And for those of us that have bought things from the TV commercials telling us that it slices, it dices, and does everything else and changes the baby, we find out later that it isn't quite so. That's a good thing about having gray hair, by the way.
Before I get, don't hold your thought and don't lose that, because one of what I want you to share with about this is that it's actually a lot of these major corporations are early adapters to it, and it's already in acceptable payment format. So just remember, just to kind of whatever you're
Yeah.
sharing, to bring that in, because there are also some challenges, which is I'm sure what you're leading to, that it's not the fix, or at this point it's not where it needs to be.
Right, there are business opportunities because a lot of people are saying, we can do this. But it's, once again, I'm going to another example, the kid who buys a bicycle but doesn't know how to ride it. But he knows it's the fastest thing on two wheels, and he believes everything he read in the advertisement. So I had that thought, and I was reading on LinkedIn, which is a website for professionals, a gentleman asked, how can we make Bitcoin go mainstream? And we started a whole bunch of discussions. We started giving ideas, and then there came the point where I told everybody, guys, we're starting now to give something that is of value. I suggest we have a private conversation. And a few of us got together into that private conversation, and the idea of the Cryptocurrency Standards Association, Crypsa, was born. Now, Crypsa was born out of the idea that we needed a neutral party to bring together all of the different voices worldwide that are working with not only Bitcoin, but all of the other types of cryptocurrency that exist and that will exist. We decided that we needed some rules of the road, that we needed to map the territory, because this was a brand new industry. Nobody knows what it's going to be. Nobody knows what's going to happen. But it had the problem that we don't speak the same language, even though English is more or less the language of Bitcoin. But 80% of transactions happen in China. So that kind of tells you, uh-oh, are the Chinese good at English? Yeah, they're pretty good, but they're not speaking colloquial English as you and I are. We have to understand, many of the users of Bitcoin have English as a second language, and they have customs. They have ways of doing business and their own personal expressions that we don't know. So we need to have a place where everyone can come together and bring all their voices, customs, ideas together. And by bringing them together, then the industry can start growing in one direction. Now, this is important because of what you said about the big corporations. If the community does what we normally do, which is everybody running around and not paying much attention, then the big corporations and the big financial systems, right now the Wall Street and the stock exchanges are starting to get involved. They're going to make the rules. Just like they did with regular money, just like they've done with so many other facets of the business world and even how communities grow. You have to follow the rules that somebody else had. It's kind of like in my background, when I talked about my background, I actually studied urban development. And one of the problems that urban developers learned when they started this new field of study was that you couldn't bring in an architect from a small, from small apartments and put him to design the houses that old Italian families were going to be moving into, Italian and Irish families, because Italian and Irish families love to have a huge kitchen. They don't care if the living room is small. They want a huge kitchen. And the architects were designing homes with very small utility kitchens. So the houses were not attractive. Part of the idea of creating a new industry is that we dream. And we don't dream in terms of, I am the powerful man who will conserve my power by having everybody do this, because this is more efficient. No. We chase our dreams by someone saying, I'd like to buy a car with Bitcoin. How can I do that? And he calls Ford and says, Ford, can I buy one with Bitcoin? And then Ford now has a customer that they want to satisfy. They're not doing it just to make money. They're doing it because they're serving their customer. Overstock accepts Bitcoin. Now, Overstock's being smart. They decided they would be part of the community. They don't change their Bitcoins directly into dollars once they do the transaction. They save a few Bitcoins so they can buy from another business. Right now, that's smart because most businesses are giving discounts if you use Bitcoin. They're doing this to attract new clientele. But Bitcoin has the great advantage that the technology not only has the protection that you can't cut and paste the money, you can't duplicate it, but every transaction is put into a file that's shared with the whole world.
All right, so I want to throw something in really quickly before I forget the train of thought. And I was sharing with a colleague about Crypsa and Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and so on. And they said, Do you know that Brookhaven Lab on Long Island actually has a computer that can produce Bitcoin? What does that mean? And what would that mean for Brookhaven National Lab, I guess, in terms of having that, and the fact that you're saying you can't cut and paste, because obviously I guess there's a number that you stop producing at, or it can't go over a certain amount. Talk about that a little bit if you can. Any insight you can provide.
Okay. First of all, let's remember that computers, even though we call them smart, all they do is they put stuff down, and boy, do they remember. They can go back and check.
Yeah, but it's an old
very
one,
quickly.
and it's a data, I guess, the size of the server or the.
Yeah, and so, but no, I'm saying that first, just because to create Bitcoin, it's actually created through a mathematical formula, and at random, when you are doing the mathematics and helping maintain that file, that shared file worldwide, where everything is written down, every so often, according to the formula, a new Bitcoin is created with its unique number. And once any unique number is put into that file, it can't be used again. That's why we know it can't be duplicated, because if anybody tries to cheat worldwide, there'll be people saying, hey, something's wrong here, somebody cheated. And internet being what it is, they can actually track down what computer cheated. Now, it used to be that a laptop could do what they call mining Bitcoin, and they can still do mining of some of the other.
And what is mining? Is that creating it?
Creating it. Mining, they call mining running the software that does all the mathematical calculations. But right now, to do Bitcoin mining, you really need computers that are dedicated to it.
Right.
And
it has the capacity.
That has the capacity to do it quickly, because the one that solves the mathematics quicker is the one that gets the money.
Now, is there a system to dictate who can and how much? I mean, how is that regulated? So if I was Brookhaven Lab and I have this machine that can do that.
You just go online, download the software, it's open source software, and you start mining.
To what extent do you stop?
You might be mining for a few months before getting anything.
Okay.
Depends on the size of your computer.
Okay.
There's actually a YouTube video where they show you, there's one place in the U.S. where the guy has, a whole wall full of computers running so he can make some money every month. And there's an entrepreneur in China who actually has a whole factory building full where he keeps 24/7 people there to make sure that if computers break down, they fix them immediately.
Then I'm curious, I guess I should let you finish your train of thought on that. Then what about everyone else? If only certain people can mine or produce it, what are we doing, buying it from them?
Yep.
Okay.
You can buy that from them. You can sell your services.
So when will that become regulated that, for example, if I'm a bank and I'm the only, the Federal Reserve, I produce money in the U.S. currency or whatever.
The Federal Reserve does that already.
I'm just saying, who decides, or when is it going to be decided how Bitcoin is going to be mined? We're not quite there yet?
At this moment, it is decided just by the software, and anybody that downloads the software does it. As we read it in the Cryptocurrency Standards Association, the person that created Bitcoin, they call him Satoshi Nakamoto, and no, that's not his real name. Nobody knows who he really is. There are a few books that have been written, and people have made money saying it's so-and-so, and radio programs, but honestly, he was very careful with his privacy, and privacy is one of the key 4 principles or 4 basic standards that he put in there, that you can keep your transactions private. But they're private because you're using a pseudonym. You're using a tag or just Oh boy, a name. A name that isn't your real name, but that's the one you go by. There are different, you use a handle, there are different words for it in the real world, but what they call it in cryptocurrency is your public key. So you've got your public key. So you've got privacy. But you've got that file that everybody shares. That means everything's transparent. You know what's going on there. Now, the way it was set up, anybody with a computer can and internet connection can freely participate. Even though you could do it by paper, let's not go to the extremes. That's freedom. Anybody can do it. That's just limited by by having the equipment. And in Africa, they're actually using cell phones with text messages to do Bitcoin transactions, which is fascinating because an entrepreneur realized that he didn't have to do the whole process and with the whole open file. He could just use text messages to give instructions. And the final part is equality. Equality goes to the core of your question. Peer to peer. Equality means you are just as important as I am. It's not the government saying that you can do this. It's not your Federal Reserve saying you can make this investment, you can do this kind of business or the other. No, it's you. You decide that you want to do a transaction. And that is very attractive to many people because they feel that they're empowered.
All right, so answer this while you're going to finish with that train of thought. Then what does that mean if this going to be the future currency in another 100 years, another 50 years? How do you foresee that? Because then that doesn't really tie into what it is you're sharing, right?
No, what I'm sharing is that we have a big possibility of changing our financial system. Part of the problem of the existing financial system is that all of it is run by different governments that have different rules, different procedures, and each one is trying to coordinate with the others, but situations like Greece, like Spain, happen where somebody spends more than they have. And the government is backing that money, but the government's about to go down. 200, 300 years ago, they'd be invaded and new government, new money, and everybody's unhappy or happy, depending. But now we don't have that. We don't have invasions. We don't take over a country. Some exceptions, but in general. And we're heading towards something different, something that's global. Cryptocurrency has the possibility of creating a unit of value that will be used across borders, within borders, even with the upcoming space industry we're going to have. It will allow money to be transferred without worrying about the governments. But to do that, we do need some rules. What we at Crypsa are proposing is that we, the users of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency, set those rules. And we can do it if we pull together. Right now, we're not the only ones trying to set standards. There's a banking group trying to set standards. There's mainly remittances group trying to set standards. And there's a Wall Street group, just to mention 3. And then there are the foundations for each one of the different coins, including Bitcoin, that set rules themselves. Because let's not forget, software is nothing more than a set of rules. But we need rules for the humans. Because sadly, we humans are great at trying to rip somebody off. I mean, as an entrepreneur, that's one of your concerns. Can I believe the person? Is this contract going to be fulfilled correctly? Well, with cryptocurrency, you can actually have what they call multi-signature contracts, where the money is held until 2 of the 3 or 4 of the 5 people involved say, okay, it was fulfilled. So that part's great because the money's there, it's locked, it's kind of like an escrow. But the problem with an escrow is you have to trust that the bank won't be held up with a lawyer or something else when you want your money. Cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, offers us the opportunity to create new business tools, a whole new way of doing business globally. Right now, most businesses are just using it to make their job easier or safer, which is fine. I mean,
Well, it's in the start-out phase, so it has to be integrated. In terms of early adapters and so on, I think, I've read about Citibank, IBM's. You wanted to mention about some of the payment card industries are also interested or using or facilitating, because I think it becomes some kind of competition for them as well because of the fees that are involved. So talk a little bit more about that, because I think we have like about 15 or so minutes before the show wraps up.
Okay.
And then wrap up, tell me a little bit more about, your family and so on, because I believe you have a family, and I think you just had a couple of your children are graduate. I think one graduated and have a couple more
Yes.
going. So we're on the clock, about 15 minutes, all
Okay.
yours.
The movement of money across borders that I already mentioned involves fees. Now, those fees are partially for moving the money and also the insurance fees. Because if something goes wrong, the payment has to be made anyway. So right now we're talking 3 to 5% fees almost automatically, even for banks to pay when they move money around. That can get very expensive. Worse yet, the systems that they use are based on old technology. These are systems that IBM and other companies created in the 50s and 60s. And have they been improved? Of course. And they've done what they call scalability. Scalability means make it bigger, make it be able to handle more. Problem is that you have hackers in third world countries that handle that software very well. And they've discovered ways of breaking into the software, breaking into the websites, breaking into the systems and the servers, and making changes that allow them to steal money. Let's just put it that way. The first adopters within each company usually are people who are reading documents just like I did and say, hold it, this can solve this problem. And then they go through the corporate structure convincing people that this is something good. Wall Street, for example, right now has one part of it that's going to be using blockchain technology. They're going to be testing it for registering all of the transactions in the stock exchange, just to make sure that it does work correctly. They're also starting to test Bitcoin-based investments, where people don't have to buy the Bitcoins, but they put money into an investment fund, and that investment fund then buys and sells Bitcoins. The same is going to happen with other digital currency, but each one of these early adopters starts testing to see how it works. There's actually we have in New York the honor of having the first chartered Bitcoin exchange, but it's chartered as a trust, as the equivalent of a bank. And that's an interesting route that early adopters of Bitcoin thought would never happen. Because the idea of Bitcoin is you don't need a bank. But with all the regulations that you need to do business in the U.S., it's actually smarter to become a bank in New York State, and so you can do business all over the U.S. and internationally, than to go as a money exchanger, which is the other route, needing to get almost, in every state, I think there's only 3 states that you don't need a license right now, and registering with the federal government and complying with all of these rules that if you're a bank, it's already in your software, it's everything, and it's the same. If you're a money exchanger, each state has different rules. If you're a bank, one set of rules for you.
And I think it also, in terms of like the Western Unions and the MoneyGrams, it makes it accessible for some people who are using that in peripheral or third world countries or underdeveloped fourth world countries to be able to especially have phones. It's become more accessible for them to have cell phones.
Yep.
That they can provide those quick bucks or money for groceries or for rent or whatever it is that they need them to be able to do.
And the low fees mean that if I only have $5 and I'm putting it into Bitcoin, at most, right now, at most I'll be paying is maybe 1%, 5 cents for it. Wow, that's wonderful. If you've ever had to use one of the remittance services, or worse yet, a bank, the fees are humongous. I still remember 10 years ago, I'd promised my daughter that I would transfer money from my account to her account here in the U.S. And the bank calls me and says, Mr. Perez, you're transferring $100. I said, yes, thank you for calling. I said, Mr. Perez, do you realize that transfer is going to cost you $40? And I said, oh my God, but I promised that that money would be in her account tomorrow. So thank you for calling. Now, they called me. Yes, they were worried about it, somebody spending all this money. But the other reason I think they called me is that money launderers, criminals, they do that to test the bank.
Okay.
They actually make small transfers first to see if it works, and then they send the big money.
Okay. Now, let's get a couple of minutes, because then I have to wrap up the show as well.
Okay.
Bring that in. You talked a little bit about one of your daughters. Tell me a little bit about family. Get a couple of minutes, and
I am
we'll
the proud father of one systems engineer, one pulmonary therapist, who she actually has degrees in Venezuela and now in the U.S. because she moved back to the U.S. and had to go back to school. And I have I have another daughter who's an astrophysicist, and I have my youngest graduating next week. And I'm very happy because the family will all be going to celebrate that graduation. And it's just, I have to be so thankful. Because when we came to the U.S., we came back. First thing my daughter said was, these schools are so great. They gave us everything we needed. Public schools in New York City. The teacher said, oh, you don't have a notebook? Here's a notebook. You don't have a pencil? Here's a pencil. Here are your books. Here's everything. You start learning. And they didn't even speak English at that moment. So we are so grateful for all the opportunities the city's given us, which brings to giving back. I give back to my community. I am active in politics. I'm active in my community. I help organize. I help organize the small businesses. And I'm active in politics because I also believe that if you're not working towards the solution, if you're not part of the solution, you're on the other part of the equation. Because problems usually happen because most people didn't care to fix it before it became a problem. So in my community, I help other people be active. They know they can call me and say, Manny, I want to do this. I'll just go and help them. And I think that's good for business too. Because when we have the full community of cryptocurrency running, the idea is that people anywhere in the country will be calling my office and saying, Manny, what can we do? We see this coming down the road. And then we sit down and we can make shout-outs to the rest of the community and say, guys, what do you think about this? How should we handle it?
Two quick things. One, and like I said, quick so we can run through. I still got a couple of minutes, I guess, and then I wrap up. Tell the relationship between your new business and your political role, because I think that's important for people to understand, to create some kind of clarity. Is there any conflicts of interest, that sort of thing? And then I think one of your daughter you mentioned was recently awarded a scholarship.
Oh, yes, okay. The relationship between the political part and my business is politics, according to one of the definitions, is the science of how people work together towards a goal. And it's, yes, is it public? Is it communities? Yes, it's not a money-oriented goal. It's a goal of living together. In the Cryptocurrency Standards Association, the idea is that we are creating a brand new future. But right now, it's the Wild West out there. So we have to bring order to the Wild West. Governance, which is the art of being a government, governance is possible within every community. They call that self-governance. And that's what most of us learn as we grow up. We grow up so that our parents don't have to be scolding us every 5 minutes. We learn how to be a good working unit, a good family unit that governs itself. And that's part of the process of maturing and growing up. And honestly, it's a lot of fun when you're part of a family, as I am right now, where everybody's an adult, and I get to ask them, what should I do? And it's a lot of fun. Now, you asked about the scholarship. Well, my daughter, the astrophysicist, I'm very proud to say, got a Fulbright grant, and she will be traveling to South Africa to do astronomy. And she'll also be doing with a professor in South Africa who does archaeoastronomy, studying the newly found files of Timbuktu. She's going to be studying what the ancients thought about the stars and such, and documenting it, and seeing what we can learn from these people who worked just through their eyesight, but who were collecting information for centuries and putting it into these files in this library that was hidden in Timbuktu. It's all written in Arabic, apparently. My daughter doesn't read Arabic, but she's just there to do the science. And it's exciting because it's one of the few ancient hoards of knowledge that are available to us right now. Mm-hmm. And it's right now. Nobody knows what's in there.
Well, congratulations again. And before I wrap up, spend 2 minutes and tell me about your team in terms of your other co-founder and some of the people who you have working with you at Crypsa. You don't have to, just a few. I think Peter's on there, Phil is on there, Stephen, I think are some of the key, and you have a couple of interns that you work with.
Yes, well, first of all, I'm the conservative in our group. We have a libertarian. The libertarian is Philip Raymond, and he's a systems engineer, and he's a genius. I mean, he actually developed a email system that was anti-spam before everybody else. His invention, his company was purchased by Google, and he was part of that group that was discussing different ideas. And another person we have is Stephen Sprague from Rivets Corporation. And Stephen actually is in the cybersecurity field. He makes hardware that is technically unhackable, and now it's really unhackable because he's added the cryptocurrency technology to encrypt and protect everything, including a new product that's out in Europe that he uses with cell phones, so that when you're using your credit card now, your cell phone encrypts everything and puts it safely so that hackers can't get to it and they can't interfere with the transaction. Another member of our team in the compliance area is Jay Postma of MSB Compliance. And we have Peter Draculich, who is an expert at marketing and for a while was in charge of a lot of the TV marketing for for selling cars. But now in driving up sales, that's the name of his corporation, he's doing a lot of different marketing strategies and doing videos and doing ads, and yes, he's helping us. and I think he thinks I go too slow.
All right, tell me a little bit about your interns, and I think you're out of New York design space. If you can tell me that in about another minute or two,
Okay.
because then I have to wrap up.
We are located in LaGuardia Community College's incubator, which is called New York Designs. And we got a wonderful space there, and we've had 3 interns from New York Designs. They're, oh boy, the names. Adil Perez and Giorgio Lopez are 2 of them right now. We also have a Brandon Rosario was our first intern, and he's now studying business administration. And we have an intern from King's College in Manhattan, William Devine, and he's excellent also. And since he's studying business administration specifically, boy, does he help me with all the plans and designs, because we are also developing applications, because the idea is not just to make standards. Our idea is to make money. How? Well, if you know what the community wants, you design it. Remember I said entrepreneurs have an opportunity? Well, we are working so that we can work with the entrepreneurs and develop the applications that will serve a need and that can produce lots of money for everyone, including us.
Okay. Well, thank you for traveling all the way from Queens to be a part of the show and share with us with what you're up to and some of the new, in terms of technology, some of the challenges and what's to come. Again, this is My Business, Your World. I'm Dr. Corrine Graham. The show, I hope you're enjoying, and if you have any questions or feedback, please feel free to send an email at info@grahamconsultingandresearch.com. You can reach us at 631-481-9124. Thank you again for joining us, Mr. Perez.
Thank you, Dr. Graham, for the opportunity, and thank you all for listening in.